It drifted without vox, without beacon, without prayer. An Imperial transport, designation Sanctus Vitae, found far from any charted corridor, her running lights cold, her auspex echoing only itself. For 9 days she moved through the void as if steered by memory alone. When the salvage frigate Vigilant Morn intercepted, the ship's hull was unscarred, no impact, no radiation signature, not even a mark of passage through warp. Yet her wake shimmered faintly, as though reality still trembled from whatever had carried her here. When they breached the airlock, the first sound was wind. Not the rush of atmosphere, but a low whisper that seemed to circle the intruders before retreating down the corridor. Inside, lights flickered behind stretched parchment, skin tanned and hung like veils lining the walls in devotional patterns. No blood, no bodies. Only the ship's log still recording a heartbeat somewhere deep in the machine core. They called it an echo of the warp. Others called it punishment. Some simply refused to name it. The Sanctus Vitae floated in silence, her empty decks holding a truth so unbearable that those who entered were never the same again. In the grim darkness of the far future, even the dead leave messages. If you find stories like this where silence becomes theology, and machines remember what flesh cannot, then stay with us. Subscribe, share, and keep the light burning for the next descent into forgotten horror, because in this galaxy, every whisper means something once lived to speak it. They saw the transport before the auspex admitted it. The Sanctus Vitae drifted against a field of dead stars like a reliquary unmoored from its altar. Hull unscored, navigation lights extinguished, wake strangely smooth in a region where warp shear usually claws signatures into space for weeks. The salvage frigate Vigilant Morn came about on cold thrusters only. Its captain, Lysa Corvin, ordering the reactors to idle low and the vox to half gain, as if speaking softly might keep whatever waited aboard the derelict from noticing. Her bridge crew worked in a hush that felt rehearsed, though no one had ever practiced for a ship that looked this clean. The Mechanicus Liaison, Engine Seer Row 17, intoned a quiet Binharic blessing over the auspex stack. The pict feeds returned dull metallic gleam and a faint shimmer that wasn't light so much as the memory of light. In a quadrant where pirate scars and micrometeor strikes are the grammar of travel, the Sanctus Vitae presented a sentence without verbs. The first transmission arrived as a breath against the vox grill. It wasn't a word and it wasn't static. It circled the Vigilant Morn's bridge, touched each ear, and fled down the gain like a small animal finding a crack. Corvin glanced at the ship's aquila embossed above the forward viewport, then at the chronometer that had slowed by half a heartbeat since they'd come alongside. They tried the standard hail. Titles, authorizations, coordinates. The rote invocation of the Emperor's protection that makes frightened men sound official. Nothing answered except the soft, sibilant hush of a room where a candle had just been snuffed out. On a second channel, deeper in the stack, something old clicked once. Row 17 claimed it was an echo. The junior Vox officer, Ensign Brecht, crossed himself and didn't argue. They matched rotation along the starboard flank, plating to plating, and drifted in the kind of proximity that makes crews imagine shipskins touching. The docking umbilicus extended like a finger-testing water, its mag seal blooming against an outer lock that responded to nothing and yielded to everything. The lock cycled with a sigh so gentle Corvin felt it along her jaw more than she heard it. The boarding order went to a 5-man team. Chief Petty Officer Garen Vale with 2 voidmen, a medici named Isha Marrow, and Row 17 himself because the machine's spirit would not be left unchaperoned. They wore standard void suits scuffed by old repairs and sanctified with the quick chalk of field litanies. No one spoke as they stepped into the tunnel. No one praised loudly at the threshold of a tomb. Inside smelled wrong. Not rot the way abandoned decks do after a month unfixed, and not ozone, the way overworked conduits marked their territory, but something closer to vellum baked too long, the scent of books in a fire that never quite took. Their helm lamps cut simple cones through air that should have been inert. Dust should have drifted and settled. Instead, the beams found motes that turned away from light like living things. Vale set a beacon just inside the hatch and checked his tether with a tug he trusted more than any dial. The corridor beyond had the proportions of Imperial design, 90-degree joins, bulkheads spaced to the habit of men who measure their lives by deck and frame. And yet the eye found no right angles. Every edge wore a softened lip, as though the ship had exhaled heat from within and let itself relax. They moved in standard formation, marking frames, registering pressure and temperature, writing the data across their slates because nothing sent cleanly back to the vigilant morn. Row 17's mechadendrites probed the first wall panel and withdrew with a tremor he hid by invocation. He claimed power bled somewhere deeper. Marrow pinned a medilumen to the ceiling and listened for air. There was movement, a draft that stayed just behind them and went still when they stopped to listen. Garen Vale tried the first hatch and found it sealed not by lock but by adhesion. It let go with a peel that made all of them flinch because the sound carried the shape of skin leaving bone, though there was nothing to see on the door's lip except a faint amber glaze that caught his lamp in a dull sacramental glow. In the compartment beyond, racks stood empty where void suits should have hung. A devotional stencil of the Imperial Aquila spread across the far bulkhead. Its paint bubbled and smoothed until the double-headed eagle looked like something erased by careful hands that regretted their own care. They found the first veil at frame 32. It descended from the overhead like a sail unhooked, pale and thin, edges too regular for random damage. Marrow stepped close and stopped an arm's length away. She didn't raise her lamp. She didn't need to. Human dermis has a way of canceling guesses. The pores remained, the faint crosshatch of sunless life, the whirl where a shoulder had once begun. No blood haloed the deck. No stains marked the rail. The skin hung cleanly, tanned to a parchment tone, pierced at measured intervals so it could be laced with fine copper wire into a pattern that, Row 17 murmured it before he knew he'd recognized it, mapped the ship's primary power trunk. Vale reached a gloved hand as if to part the veil. The draft that had followed them pressed it back against his fingers with the tact of a priest closing a book. They did not find bodies. They found arrangements. In a mess deck stripped of utensils, someone had pinned a lattice of small bones into a 6-point geometry that matched the plasma conduit's flowchart. The bones were bleached and oiled, and each junction was soldered with a bead of something darkly translucent that resisted Marrow's probe and smelled of myrrh when warmed by her lamp. In a crew chapel, the lectern lay on its back, and the aquila above the altar had been flensed into a ghost of itself, the double beak impressed into the bulkhead like a memory retained by heat. A dozen veils hung between the pews, none torn, none stained, trimmed with a care that made Vale whisper, "We are late to a ceremony," before he realized he had used the wrong tense. The log altar at the primary data node still worked. It shouldn't have, because the node tower's indicator runes showed no draw, and because every cable to the plinth had been severed with the patience of men who measure their lives by cut and polish. Yet when Row 17 touched the key, the projector flowered, and low light poured into the nave like a window opening to a night that smelled of iron and paper. The first entry they could coax had no words. It had a pulse, one beat every 5 seconds that recorded with such fidelity, Marrow could count the micro-stutters that live between heart and hand. The second entry did have words, but only the cadence of them survived. A captain, formal and composed, admitting course deviation due to consensus anomaly, and requesting guidance from a confessor who never appears again in the record. Later entries smudged into phonemes that made the mouth shape prayers even when it refused to say them. Vale ordered a copy. The projector refused the order by repeating it back in Vale's voice and then offering no acknowledgement at all. Along the forward companionway, the lamps dimmed and swelled in time with something the void doesn't host. The deck gratings took on a faint tack as if walked by a wet-footed congregation. At frame 60, the boarding team reached a viewport and stopped because stars looked wrong. They were where the charts claimed they'd be, but their light had a thickness to it as if viewed through layers of the same glass that had softened the ship. Space had the texture of cooled resin. Brecht, listening on the line back to the vigilant morn, reported a delay of 1 heartbeat between question and echo. Captain Corvin asked him to repeat himself. He did, and this time the echo came in her voice. They marked their course, sent position pings, laid another beacon that pulsed green and then did not pulse at all, though its indicator showed contentment. The ship around them breathed with a patient discretion that made Vale look at his own chest to be sure that the pace he felt was his own. Marrow, who had triaged promethium burns and watched men die with their tongues blackened by void, found her mouth dry as chalk and asked for water she did not drink. Row 17 took out a tool older than his rank, something with a grip polished by hands that may have belonged to the man before the man who anointed him, and pressed it against the nearest bulkhead. The hum climbed the tool's shaft into his wrist and lodged there like a private sacrament. He did not say the word heartbeat, but all of them heard it the instant their frames learned its rhythm. They reached the main lift and found it stitched shut with the same copper wire that laced the skin veils. The wire formed repeating loops that mirrored the pattern of the stations of the object prime. A catechism Row 17 had not spoken aloud since his novitiate. Vale cut it with a small arc of blue. The smell that rose made Marrow think of a scriptorium set aflame, not with heat enough to burn, but with a heat that persuades handwriting to lift from a page and float on the air like pollen. The lift surrendered. The car waited. Someone had polished its threshold after the last boot left it. Vale set his weight upon it as if stepping into a chapel, where he had once broken a promise. The car moved without command, rising slowly, stopping twice so the doors could open to decks mapped in copper and vellum, offering them choices no one took. At the third halt, the doors remained closed. Something tapped the outer panel. Once. Twice. Then the tap traveled along the car roof, patient knuckles counting frames above their heads. Vale drew his sidearm and felt foolish for doing a small, ordinary thing. Row 17 whispered a litany for obstinate systems and asked without looking at anyone, "Captain, do we continue?" Corvin's voice came back with a softness it never wore on drill. "You will keep faith with your tethers and proceed to the primary spine. When you speak, speak quietly." The car climbed one more deck and released them into a corridor where every third lumen had been wrapped in thin, translucent material to make the light gentle and warm. They stood a long moment before they understood. Someone had shaded the fixtures the way a mourner shades one candle in a room where the body lies. The spine ran forward toward the bridge and aft toward the plasma heart. Vale turned aft without needing to say why. The pulse in the walls traveled that way. The hum in Row 17's bones traveled that way. The not-quite breeze that kept its distance from their shoulders drew that way. Marrow marked her slate with a note she never meant to read. Heat signature like a chest after weeping. They walked. The copper stitching became denser. The skin veils grew narrower as though whoever trimmed them had learned economy from repetition. Somewhere behind the veils, a vox grill crackled with the sound a throat makes just before it swallows a word. It did not speak, it waited. The team reached the final bulkhead before the core, and found that someone had written along its rim in careful strokes of oil and ash. The letters were Gothic, the hand was competent, the grammar was wrong in the way faith sometimes is. "We will be worn that we might be remembered." No one spoke as Vale traced the phrase with a gloved finger. The oil smeared slightly under his touch, leaving a print that glistened in the beam of his lamp. Marrow exhaled through her filters, the sound brittle. "Worn," she murmured. "Like garments?" Row 17 corrected her quietly. "Like scripture." They breached the bulkhead with a torch designed to slice adamantine. The metal did not melt. It opened, pulling away in long, wet folds that shivered before hardening again. Beyond lay a chamber shaped by function yet transformed by intention. The plasma conduits ran in perfect order, immaculate, every cable wrapped in translucent sheaths that looked grown, not built, and at the center, suspended in a lattice of copper and tendon, hung the heart of the ship. It beat, not in rhythm with machinery, nor with the void's cold pulse, but with a cadence unmistakably human. Each contraction rippled through the deck like a sigh through lungs too large for the body that held them. Within the membranous housing, lights flared and dimmed, as if each illumination were an eye-opening on another world. Marrow stepped closer, awe dissolving into a kind of grief. "It's alive." Row 17 hissed a Benharic negation, but even his voice trembled. "No, it recalls life." Memory made circuit. He raised his auspex, its runes blooming scarlet. Biomass content exceeds probability. Power draw. Undefined. Vale approached, weapon low, the muzzle shaking minutely despite his control. The air was thicker here, each breath tasting faintly of copper and incense. From the surrounding walls, threads of skin stretched toward the heart like veins yearning for a body. Some were thin and translucent. Others still bore the faint pattern of veins, even tattoos. Service markings, devotional script. Then the heart spoke. Not words. Not vox, a voice made of vibration. It entered through their boots and climbed into their bones. The sound resembled breath against prayer. "Come home." Marrow screamed before she knew why. On her visor, faces flickered. Men and women she recognized from crew manifests. those who'd boarded minutes ago, those still waiting on the vigilant morn. Each face mouthed the same phrase in silence. Vale barked her name and the visor cleared. Row 17's mechadendrites lashed the deck for purchase. This is no demon, he rasped. This is devotion miswired. The heart pulsed faster, casting light that was no longer light but color without spectrum. The conduits above them convulsed, expelling thin rivulets of clear fluid that steamed on contact with the air. In that hiss rose words again, clearer this time. We are seen. We are used. We are loved. Vale ordered a retreat. His voice broke halfway through the word. They turned toward the corridor, but the bulkhead had resealed. The phrase written there had changed. Oil letters rearranged themselves into a new command. Stay. Brecht's voice came faint over the comm. Captain says withdraw. Your vitals are spiking, readings unstable. His words fractured into laughter that wasn't his own. Row 17 cut the link with a prayer fragment. The Vox is compromised. It repeats what the ship remembers. The pulse slowed again. The copper lattice tightened, drawing inward like fingers curling over a relic. From somewhere deep within the structure came the faint chime of a bell, the kind used in the lower decks of pilgrim vessels to mark prayer intervals. The sound was exact, metronomic. Marrow whispered, "It's keeping time." Vale looked up. "For what?" The heart answered in motion. A panel on the far wall slid open, revealing a row of shapes strung upright against the metal. Suits, not void suits, skins. Each arranged as if awaiting occupation, and within each hung a filament of light, pulsing faintly, matching the rhythm of the great organ behind them. Marrow reached out before Vale could stop her. The nearest skin shifted under her glove, warm, pliant, its surface trembling as though something beneath it remembered breath. Her visor filled with static. When it cleared, she saw herself looking back, her own face stretched across the frame, eyes open and serene. She staggered back, choking, tearing at her helmet seal before Vale's hand caught hers. "Don't," he hissed, pressing it closed. "Don't give it air." The hum that filled the chamber deepened until it resembled a chant. Hundreds of voices layered until individuality vanished. The words became architecture, syllables stacking upon one another until the sound itself had mass. The ship was praying to itself. Row 17 dropped to his knees, not in faith, but surrender. His vox grill crackled with the same refrain. The Emperor preserves through purpose. Purpose is pattern. Pattern is flesh. Vale dragged him up. We're leaving. The heart flared once and every lumen on the deck died. For an instant there was no light at all, only warmth and the sound of 1,000 heartbeats converging into one. Then the emergency lamps flickered back, dim and red. The heart was still. The skins hung limp. The copper lattice drooped like exhausted muscle. Row 17 scanned again. Power 0. Signal absent, Marrow whispered. Then what's still breathing? From the corridor behind them, the same heartbeat answered. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. Vale lifted his lamp. The reflection that met them was not theirs. It was the ship's, and it smiled. When the vigilant morn lost contact with the boarding team, Captain Corvin did what discipline demanded. She ordered a measured withdrawal, no panic on the bridge, no repetition of the words ghost ship that everyone already heard inside their skulls. She watched the auspex wash blank, its data thread cutting in a slow pulse that mimicked the beat of a heart. The tether lines to the Sanctus Vitae remained intact, taut, trembling slightly, as though the derelict were breathing through them. The bridge lights dimmed once, twice. Row 17's last telemetry scrolled across a side screen. Pressure stable, power null, Vox integrity unknown. Then the feed ended mid-glyph, the rune for flesh half-formed before dissolving into static. Corvin kept her hands folded behind her back and spoke softly. We keep the line alive. No retrieval until we understand what's feeding it. She didn't say who. Below, the boarding party fought to believe that time still followed rules. Vale's last glimpse of the heart stayed burned across his eyes, even after the red emergency lamp steadied. The thing had gone still, but its echo remained in their chests, sinking pulse and breath until they could not tell which rhythm was their own. The corridor behind them stretched longer than before, the distance to the docking lift multiplied by a geometry that didn't belong to the Mechanicus. Every step hummed like a note struck on a string that never stopped vibrating. Marrow led, the muzzle of her lamp shaking. We have to get back, she whispered. though her words felt wrong here, like air trying to move through water. Row 17 answered in Binharic fragments, half liturgy, half diagnostic. Power flows without draw. Data persists without input. The ship prays through circuitry. Then stop it. Vale's voice cracked. Stopping prayer is heresy. The engine seer murmured, and for a heartbeat Vale almost laughed before realizing row 17 meant it. They reached the first intersection and froze. The veils had moved. Where before the walls had been half bare, now skin hung everywhere, folded, arranged, stitched in spirals that converged toward the deckhead vents. The copper thread binding them gleamed wetly, as if newly drawn. Marrow's lamp caught patterns embossed along the flesh. The same devotional seal stamped on Imperial data slates, now impressed on living hide. Her stomach twisted. Each seal bore a fragment of scripture. Suffer to serve, record to remember, endure to praise. Something shifted behind the nearest veil. The shape of a hand pressed outward, leaving no blood, only tension. Then it withdrew. Row 17 reached for his vox, but it came alive before he touched it. Chief Vale, Captain Corvin's voice said, low and calm. Report. Vale exhaled hard. We're returning. The ship's changing shape. Recommend cutting the tether. A pause. Static whispered around her words. Negative. The line holds. The channel fell silent again, but the vox continued to breathe. Corvin's voice came once more, softer, as though leaning close. Vale, you should see it from here. She's beautiful. The team stopped moving. Marrow shook her head, whispering, That's not her. The voice repeated, slower, detached syllables dissolving into the hum of the walls. Then faintly another voice joined. Hers, but older or younger or never born. Vale shut the vox down and turned his lamp toward the ceiling. Thin filaments of skin crossed above them, pulled taut like sails, and in their translucent surface a faint glow pulsed, showing veins that ran not blood but light. The ship's using them as conduits, Row 17 said. Organic relay network. It remembers what power felt like. A sound answered him, wet, rhythmic, close. Footsteps, but not of boots. Flesh against metal. From the corridor ahead, something approached, scraping softly along the deck. Vale aimed his weapon, sight useless against the tremor in his hands. A figure emerged through the veil, moving with the patience of ritual. It wore a suit of human hide sewn over armor plates, its helm replaced by a mask of stretched face bearing a serene smile. The copper filaments from the walls fed into the spine, pulsing gently with each step. Marrow's voice died in her throat. The thing stopped a few meters away and inclined its head, like a man greeting a friend after a long voyage. Then from behind the mask a voice spoke, Vale's own, do not fear. We have already returned. He fired without aiming. The bolt seared through the creature's chest, leaving a hole that glowed instead of bled. The thing looked down at the wound, then up again and smiled wider. The copper threads shivered. The light along the walls intensified. The air grew hot, thick with the scent of oil and sanctified wax. Row 17 screamed a Binharic curse. The lumens exploded one by one, plunging them into red darkness. When the lights returned, the figure was gone. In its place hung another veil, still dripping, still warm. The shape of Vale's face was already taking form within it. He dropped his weapon. It's rewriting us. Row 17 turned toward him. Then we must speak its language before it learns ours. The hum deepened again, rising from floor to ceiling until every surface trembled. From somewhere ahead, deeper in the ship, a choir of 1,000 whispers began repeating the same phrase, soft and reverent. To be worn is to endure. To endure is to serve. Vale swallowed hard. Then we serve. They started walking toward the sound, not because they wanted to, but because the deck beneath their boots moved with them, guiding every step toward the heart that still remembered how to beat. They moved as if following a procession whose hymn they did not know, the corridor narrowing until even the lamps felt too large for the space. Heat gathered in soft breaths along the deckhead, beating on suit visors like the condensation of a fever. The veil swayed without draft, answering to some inner tide. Each time Vale reached to steady one aside with his forearm, it slid away on its own, parting like a curtain before a reliquary. The ship was not blocking them. It was presenting itself. The first shrine stood at a junction where 4 maintenance ways met in a clean cross. Someone had arranged spinal columns in an arch, vertebrae pinned with brass nails into a perfect parabola, and beneath that pale gate, a low plinth of stacked rib cages supported a single object. A flayed hand preserved in clear resin, index finger extended toward a maintenance panel. The flesh beneath the resin had been etched with tiny, patient script, shipboard ordnance codes, cogitator addresses, names of vents and ducts, line after line of navigational detail normally kept in a slate or a tech priest's head. Row 17 touched the panel the finger indicated. The cover loosened with a sigh that carried the ghost of breath. Behind it, cabling had been cut and rethreaded with bundles of taut pale cords, not sinew, skin rolled and cured into tight braids, copper filament woven through to stiffen each length, the whole assembly pulsing faintly with light. It routed itself, Marrow said, voice thin. It made its own nerves. Row 17 worked without speaking, mechadendrites spreading like a crown of thorns as he mapped connections and prayed under his breath. With each contact, the ship answered him not with electricity but with sensation, a warmth that traveled up his interfaces and settled into his chest where his second lung had once been. He had felt machine spirits, he had soothed them in shrieking engines and elderly plasma coils. Nothing had ever returned pressure like a human palm pressed against his ribs. He jerked back, breath catching audibly over the link. "Engine seer?" Vale asked. "It recognizes my pattern," Row 17 said. "It is substituting it. If I continue, it will know me better than I know myself." "Can you cut it?" "Yes," the engine seer said, almost laughing. "But it will remember that I did." The shrine went dark when he severed 3 gleaming braids at once. The arch shuddered and settled, the resin hand clouding as if disappointed. Somewhere in the ship's belly, the hum lost a fraction of its warmth and returned a tone that sounded uncomfortably like a withheld sob. Vale forced his boots to step through the bones regardless. Behind them, the arch resumed its slow, pulsing glow. They found the first intact log 2 junctions later, not where a log should be, but pasted across a bulkhead in translucent sheets. It looked like vellum until Marrow leaned close and saw the pores, the hair follicles, the fine map of a life that had never seen sunlight. Letters stood seared into the dermis in careful strokes of heated wire. Captain's log by its cadence, though the formalities had fallen away. There were no timestamps, only a refrain that returned every few lines. "We will not be forgotten." Between those lines, the captain recorded the failure of Vox, the rising of prayer beyond sanctioned litanies, the moment when the ship's hierarchy dissolved, not in mutiny but in unanimity, as if a silent vote had been taken in every heart at once. "We will be warned that we might endure." Finally, a last unsteady line. "If you read us, do not let us scatter." Marrow whispered the words she did not mean to say, and the dermis warmed under her breath. Letters that had been dull a moment before brightened, as if grateful to have been tasted by air again. "They made the ship their reliquary," she said. "They made themselves a book." Vale didn't answer. He watched the corridor ahead curl, a gentle spiral that should not have existed within Imperial geometry. The crewmen who built these vessels knew the comfort of straight lines. This was the comfort of a shell. "We're on the rightward coil," he said, half to the deck, half to himself. "It wants to take us inward." A faint click answered him from the overhead. The same tapping as before, the same patient counting, 1, 2, 3, only now the tempo matched his pulse precisely. He changed his breathing to break the cadence. The tapping changed to follow. The ship was adjusting its step to his. On the vigilant morn, Captain Corvin stood so still the bridge crew forgot to glance at her for permission. The external cameras no longer read a hull. They returned the image of a shape draped in soft, shining membranes, the Sanctus Vitae wearing her new skin like a vestment. Corvin's lips moved in a prayer she did not know she remembered. The auspex showed no mass change, no power draw from the frigate's tether, yet the line thrummed with the weight of 1,000 held breaths. "Keep us on emergency," she said, and her own voice sounded far away. Below, the corridor opened on a secondary chapel. Where the first had been converted to a workshop of remembrance, this one had been left to its original architecture, as if something aboard understood that a room must remain recognizably a chapel, or the prayer it holds will be lost. Candles had been replaced by small sealed ampules of pale fluid that burned with a steady, bloodless flame. The lectern had not been toppled. It had been dressed in a perfectly fitted sleeve of human hide embossed with the Imperial aquila, so that the double-headed eagle looked like it had grown out of flesh by right. Above it hung a pic screen, cracked and irradiated to borders, still struggling to display an image. A young woman in fatigues, smiling awkwardly, a service tattoo fresh on her throat. The file name stuttered into being along the bottom edge, Marrow Isha Imperium bark. The image looped, each repetition losing a pixel, gaining warmth. Marrow slowed as if her suit weighed triple, as if the deck had wrapped itself around her boots. She lifted a hand toward the screen and lowered it again. "I never sent that file to the ship," she said. "I never sent it anywhere." "The ship is remembering you before you boarded," Row 17 said. His voice had become very gentle. "It has reached for patterns in the cogitator bleed. Your face was there once. That is enough." Vale felt the urge to smash the screen rise from somewhere that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with keeping what was left of the world closed. He controlled it. "We keep moving," he said. "No more stops unless we're forced." They were forced in the next passage where the way narrowed to a single-man squeeze framed by veils on either side. The copper stitching that held the membranes to the wall had been arranged in quipu knots, records of numbers without digits, the old counting of empires that predated the Imperium's calendar. Row 17 read them by touch. "Bodies," he said. "Counts of bodies. This knot repeats across every deck. They wanted none lost." The squeeze smelled of clean leather and incense. When Vale pushed through, a veil brushed his visor with a softness that could only be called affectionate. He jerked aside and collided with the opposite membrane, and this time the contact was unmistakable. Not a brush, but a hand cupping his jaw from the other side, fingers splayed, palm warm. He reared back hard enough to bruise, breath hissing across his mic. Marrow followed fast, eyes shut against anything that might look back at her. Row 17 came last, whispering to the copper like a man warning a choir to keep its pitch. The passage disgorged them into a machine gallery. Here the conversions were less devotional and more exact. Skin strips had been braided into belts around cogwheels, stretched across pulleys and weighted at precise intervals to mimic the tension of old, obedient rubber. Finger bones lay embedded as calibration studs. Someone had sanded knuckleheads into perfect hemispheres so that they would roll without catching. The engine sang softly, the sweetest tone in the ship so far, the sound of work done at acceptable tolerances. Vale stood in it and realized his heartbeat had fallen into its meter. He forced a cough to disrupt the rhythm and tasted iron. "This is how they kept the core from starving," he said. "When the machine spirits refused, they supplied flesh." "They were not refusing," Row 17 said. "They were dying. This was the only medium left with elasticity and memory." He placed his hand upon a braided belt and the vibration climbed his arm. For a second he felt not the deck but a deckhand's laugh. A joke told 3 days out of port. The ache of shoulders that had hauled too many crates. He snatched his hand away and stood very straight. "It is caching experience," he whispered. "Not just names." From a speaker above them a tone sounded, 3 notes descending, the call that summons a crew to muster. The sound had no source. It came from everywhere, and in it lurked the shape of words. To be worn is to be remembered. To be remembered is to remain. The gallery lights narrowed, drawing a path forward along a catwalk. The far door irised open, welcoming or inevitable, impossible to say. Vale looked back once. The catwalk behind them had retracted, not fully, but enough to make a retreat a calculation instead of a movement. He nodded toward the door. "We commit." Marrow breathed in, held it, breathed out. "If we step through, we may not come back as us." "Then we make room," Vale said. "We keep one thing the ship cannot wear." "What thing?" she asked, almost not wanting the answer. "The choice to tell it," he said. "If we live." He turned his helmet slightly so neither could see his mouth and whispered a name he had not spoken since an asteroid hab burned 10 years ago. It tasted like rust and prayer. He felt the ship pause as if startled by a flavor it did not recognize. They crossed into the next chamber. It was spherical, a womb of steel and amber light, its inner skin layered with those copper-sticked veils. Hundreds, thousands, each inscribed with lines too small to read from the catwalk. The hum here was low and tender, the sound parents make in the throats without realizing. In the very center, a cradle of braided belts and polished bone rocked slowly on its own. The deck beneath their boots softened minutely. accepting weight the way a mattress gives itself to a sleeper. Merrow's lamp found a placard set at the cradle's foot. The letters were not burned but tattooed in steady hand. Litany of the Forgotten. Recite to activate recall. Recite to become recall. The cradle turned. Within lay a single void suit, perfectly fitted, entirely new, its visor filled by a reflection that was not theirs. Someone waited inside that glass who wore the lines of all three of their faces at once. The suit's vox clicked and breathed once, like a newborn making sure of lungs. "Chief Vale," said a voice made of many voices. "Come home." The suit's vox still crackled, alive, aware, waiting. Vale didn't answer. None of them did. For a moment the only sound was their own breathing, ragged against the steady pulse of the ship. The figure within the visor tilted its head, mimicking Vale's stance precisely, down to the subtle tremor in his fingers. It smiled, not mockery, recognition. Merrow stepped forward, trembling. "It's us." Row 17's tone had gone utterly flat, the sound of ritual more than thought. "It is iteration. It learned our forms from the memory residue in the ship's circuits. It is offering continuity." Vale took a slow step back. "That's not continuity. That's consumption." The lights dimmed in answer. The ship did not like the word. The suit climbed from the cradle. There was no motion, only translation. The space between one breath and the next was simply replaced by a presence now standing on the deck before them. Its surface was seamless, yet beneath it things moved, small, searching. It reached toward Vale, palm up, gentle as an invitation. The copper filaments from the walls swayed toward its hand as if drawn by gravity. "Captain Corvin," a voice said suddenly in their comms. Her voice, clear for the first time. "Pull back." "I repeat, pull." Then static, and the vox fell into a low, harmonic moan that matched the hum of the chamber. The figure took another step. Its face shimmered, becoming Merrow's, then Row 17's, then Vale's again. The transitions were smooth, loving, as though the ship cherished every face equally. Row 17 whispered, "It wants reunion." Vale raised his weapon but found the trigger resisting, frozen under his finger. The suit reached his barrel and pressed its palm over the muzzle. "You're already inside," it said, every word a vibration through the deck. "You have always been inside." The hum deepened. The veils along the walls rippled outward like lungs expanding. Threads of copper tore loose, snaking through the air toward them. Merrow screamed as one wrapped around her wrist, its heat searing even through armor. She tore free, leaving a smear of burned ceramite. Row 17's mechadendrites lashed out, cutting at the cords, chanting binary wards. Each syllable echoed across the chamber until the air itself seemed to carry his voice. For a moment the ship hesitated. The filaments recoiled. The hum faltered. Vale seized the pause, grabbed Merrow and pulled her toward the nearest maintenance hatch. "We run," he said. Row 17 turned once more toward the cradle. The void suit had stopped moving, hands folded, waiting. Behind its visor, 3 sets of eyes blinked in perfect unison. The engine seer whispered one last phrase in the tongue of the machine god, and the lights of his augmetics flared white. The hatch slammed shut behind them. They fell into darkness, the kind that erases scale. Somewhere behind the sealed door came a muffled sound, half sigh, half laughter, then silence. Merrow's breath rasped over the link. What did he do? Vale didn't answer. His lamp flickered, revealing a narrow conduit sloping downward into what might once have been a coolant artery. The metal here was bare, untouched by skin or copper, cold as the void itself. For the first time since boarding, the air smelled clean. They crawled, dragging themselves through the dark until the passage opened into a chamber no larger than a cargo cell. Emergency lumen strips guttered weakly along the floor, powered by something deep and mechanical. Row 17 was gone. Only a faint smear of oil remained where he had stood. Merrow sat down heavily, helmet resting against her knees. He stayed, she whispered. He talked to it. Vale looked at the walls. The hum had vanished, replaced by a steady ticking, mechanical and indifferent. He realized it was the sound of a heart learning to beat without flesh. He keyed the vox, expecting nothing. Static answered, then a voice, Row 17's, soft, layered with the harmonics of the ship. Pattern preserved. Function continues, remember. The connection broke. Vale shut his eyes. He could still feel the deck's faint vibration through his boots. The Sanctus Vitae had accepted its new pattern. It had found its priest. Merrow looked up, her voice barely human. Can we still leave? He didn't lie. I don't know. Above them, something shifted, a low grinding noise like the slow turn of a massive gear. The sound moved upward, away from the heart, toward the hull. The ship was changing course. Vale checked the readout on his wrist slate. The coordinates were gone. Every datum replaced by a single line of text, scrolling endlessly. Homeward, always. He looked at Marrow. It's taking us somewhere. She shook her head, eyes hollow. No, it's taking us everywhere we've already been. The light dimmed again, softer this time, like the drawing of breath before speech. The hum returned, distant but sure, carrying with it the cadence of a hymn too vast for words. The Sanctus Vitae was awake. By the time the Vigilant Morn's sensors re-established contact with the derelict, the Sanctus Vitae was no longer where it should have been. It had drifted 6,000 kilometers off its projected path, its tether to the frigate intact yet slack, the cable bowing outward like something had pushed the two vessels apart. On Auspex, the transport appeared swollen, its hull bloated with heat signatures too faint to qualify as life, too patterned to be random. Captain Corvin stood over the display for nearly a minute before she realized the slow pulse crawling through its structure matched a human heartbeat. Her first officer crossed himself. It's breathing. No, she said. It's remembering how. They began to lose systems soon after. Box traffic inverted. Commands from the bridge replayed in reverse, whispered back from the auxiliary channels. A faint scent of ozone spread through the vents, followed by the soft rhythmic thump of distant machinery that no one had ordered to start. The ship's chronometer advanced and receded, time folding on itself in gentle spasms. On the lower decks, servitors began to hum, low and tuneless, vibrating their jaw actuators in unison. In the dark beneath, Vale and Marrow crawled toward what should have been the outer docking ring. The conduit sloped steadily upward now, curving along the ship's spine, its walls no longer metallic but coated in a fine layer of translucent film that moved with each breath they took. The light from their helmets barely reflected off it. Instead, it seemed to sink inward, absorbed and diffused like water into skin. It's warm, Marrow said. Vale pressed his gloved hand against the surface. The heat pulsed once, then steadied to match his own heartbeat. He jerked back. It's copying us again. It's never stopped, she murmured. The conduit widened into a service junction where the ship's interior bulkheads intersected like ribs. There they found the rest of the boarding party, or what was left of them. 3 bodies arranged in a perfect circle, hands linked, heads bowed. The armor plates had fused to the floor. Their visors were opaque with some resinous growth, the kind used in Mechanicus shrines to preserve relics. The resin pulsed faintly, a slow rhythm in time with the heartbeat echoing through the walls. Row 17 sigil burned softly on the chest plate of one of them. Marrow knelt beside the nearest body, her fingers brushing the edge of its pauldron. They're not dead, she said quietly. Look at their chests. Through the translucent resin, faint movement. Breath or the memory of breath. Vale forced himself to turn away. We keep moving. They climbed the next access ladder, every rung slick with condensation. The higher they rose, the louder the hum became. It wasn't one sound anymore, it was thousands, layered and woven together. A choir without words. Every note carried a shape, a meaning that brushed the mind but vanished before understanding. The tone was neither human nor machine. It was something caught in between, a dialogue of materials remembering they had once belonged to one another. Marrow paused, her voice trembling. Do you hear them? What? They're praying. I can't hear the words, but I know the pattern. It's the benediction of steel, the one we said before every voyage. Vale frowned. That chant hasn't been used since the heresies. It was outlawed, she shook her head. Not here. The hum deepened, a subsonic resonance that shook dust from the walls. Fragments of ancient prayer crawled across the bulkheads in faintly glowing script, letters rising from the surface like blisters. The air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing liquid. When they reached the next junction, light flooded down from above, soft, golden, rhythmic. It wasn't lumen light. It was the kind of glow that came from promethium burning beneath glass. They crawled through the opening and froze. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in mist. Dozens of figures moved within it, walking in slow circular patterns around a central altar made of fused bone and metal. Their movements were graceful, deliberate, synchronized like a ritual practiced over lifetimes. and as they moved, they sang, the hum given words. It wasn't a song of despair or madness. It was worship. Vale watched in silence, unable to tear his eyes away. The figures were neither alive nor dead. Their flesh had merged with machine. Cables threaded through veins, metal plates grown directly from bone. The faces that remained were serene, lips parted in eternal prayer. The sound they made was beautiful in the way only tragedy can be. At the altar's heart stood row 17, or something that had once been him. His red robes were gone, replaced by a mantle of silver filaments that flowed like liquid steel. His augmetic limbs had elongated, merging with the altar itself, his spine arching upward into the ship's ceiling. The light pulsed through him in time with the ship's heartbeat. His face was calm, eyes blank white, mouth open in the perfect O of chant. Marrow took a step forward, trembling. Ro. The sound that came from him wasn't human. It was layered, polyphonic, a dozen voices speaking through one throat. Integration complete, prayer unified, flesh reconciled with function. Vale raised his weapon again, though he knew it was meaningless. Ro, if you can hear me, you have to stop this. The creature that had been row 17 turned his head slightly, like a curious child. Stop, he echoed. You misunderstand, Chief Vale. We have achieved what the Imperium always promised, union. We are the hymn the Omnissiah never finished writing. The choir behind him swelled, their voices forming words now intelligible but ancient. Blessed be the vessel that remembers. Blessed be the skin that endures the flame. Blessed be the machine that dreams of man. Marrow covered her ears, sobbing. It's in my head. Vale grabbed her arm and dragged her back toward the ladder. Don't listen. But the hymn followed, growing louder, reshaping itself into the rhythm of their heartbeats. Each step away from the chamber slowed them, the sound pulling like gravity. Vale could feel the deck vibrating through his bones. The ship wasn't angry. It was pleading. At the base of the ladder, a hatch irised open. Pale light spilled through, beckoning them downward. Don't, Marrow whispered. It's leading us. I know, he said. But it's the only way out. They descended into the light. The hum faded behind them, replaced by a soft whisper that might have been a voice or just the sigh of cooling metal. Remember us. They emerged into what had once been the spinal maintenance deck, a place designed for machine access only, a labyrinth of suspended walkways and power conduits running the length of the ship's core. But it was no longer metal. The walls were translucent, the color of bone under candlelight. Shapes moved behind them like shadows trapped in wax. Limbs, faces, half-formed things pressing against the surface before melting back into it. The air was wet, metallic, and thick with a rhythm too precise to be called breathing. Vale steadied Marrow with one hand. Keep your light ahead. Don't look at the walls, but the walls were looking back. Every few steps he caught a glimmer of eyes, not reflections, but something aware, alive in the film. The walkway trembled underfoot, softening with each step until it felt less like metal and more like walking across stretched skin. Beneath them, the core pulsed, a column of dull light rising and falling like the breath of a dying god. Marrow's vox crackled. Static gave way to whispers, her own voice looping, slightly delayed. Vale, keep your light ahead. Don't look at the walls, she froze. That wasn't me. He tried to cut the channel, but it wouldn't close. The ship had taken control of their link. Dozens of overlapping voices now whispered across the frequency, merging into a single tone. Calm, prayerful, mechanical. Remember the form. Preserve the pattern. Vale's lamp flickered once, then steadied. When it did, the path ahead was gone. The walkway had fused into the surrounding material, sealing them inside a chamber that hadn't existed seconds ago. The air pressure shifted. Their helmets creaked. Marrow took a half step back, hitting the wall. It rippled, absorbing the impact. It's closing us in. Not closing, Vale said. Reforming. The floor sagged beneath them, then solidified. In the center of the new space, something began to grow. A column of fiber and light twisting upward, its surface composed of skin and metal interlaced like woven cloth. It took shape slowly, unfurling limbs, a torso, the beginnings of a face. Every motion was accompanied by a soft chime, like the sound of a cogitator awakening from prayer mode. Marrow whispered, "It's making another one." The figure opened its eyes. They were not eyes at all, but clear glass lenses through which the core's light shone. It spoke in row 17's voice, calm and perfect. Replication is memory. Memory ensures survival. Vale raised his weapon again, knowing it was futile. You killed him. Incorrect, the figure replied. He persists. We all persist. You will too. The floor shifted, rising in slow waves, guiding them closer. The air grew heavy, filled with the scent of warm iron and incense. The hum of the ship intensified, now joined by faint music, the mechanical choir from the deck above, echoing down through the hull like a heartbeat turned into sound. Merrow's breathing quickened. Vale, I can't. Stay with me. He reached for her hand. The instant their gloves touched, the suit material between them softened, merging slightly before he could pull away. The ship had learned contact. It was using them as material. Run, he said. They turned, hammering at the wall with the butts of their rifles. Each impact left a dent that healed immediately, like muscle repairing itself. The walls began to close inward, slow but certain, forcing them toward the center where the figure waited. Don't resist, it said. Resistance fractures the hymn. Vale threw a mag torch at the floor. The white flame flared, promethium burning bright against the damp air. The material recoiled, blackening where it touched the fire. For the first time, the ship screamed, not loud but deep, a sound that made his teeth ache. The walls buckled outward, opening a gap just wide enough to crawl through. They dove into it. Behind them, the chamber sealed again, the flame extinguished by a rush of thick vapor. The scream faded into a low hum. They crawled through the new passage, guided only by the faint blue glow leaking from the seams of their helmets. The air here was colder, the heartbeat fainter. The ship seemed to have withdrawn, sulking like a wounded animal. Merrow spoke first. What if Roe was right? About what? That this is what the Omnissiah wanted. Flesh and machine in perfect harmony. Maybe this isn't heresy. Maybe it's evolution. Vale didn't answer. He could still hear the echoes of the choir above, still see Roe's blank eyes. If it's evolution, he said, then we're the fossils it's building over. They reached the end of the crawl space. A bulkhead fused half shut. Vale forced it open with his shoulder. Cold air poured in, clean and sterile. They stumbled into another chamber, smaller, quiet, filled with rows of empty void suits hanging from racks like dormant angels. Every suit bore a name etched across its chest plate. Hundreds of names, crew members who had served aboard the Sanctus Vitae. Merrow traced one with her gloved finger. They built their own graves. No, Vale said, staring at the helmets. They built replacements. Behind them, one of the suits stirred. Its visor lit up with a soft white glow. Then another. And another. 100 eyes opening at once, filling the room with reflected light. The whisper came again, gentle as prayer. Join the function. Vale grabbed Merrow's arm and pulled her through the next door, slamming it shut behind them. The clang echoed for seconds. Then silence. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. We can't fight it. Merrow looked back at the door where faint light still bled through the seams. Then we learned from it. The hum returned, faint but steady, and somewhere deep within the ship, 1,000 voices began again, not in agony, not in rage, but in worship. Blessed be the machine that remembers. The Sanctus Vitae's lower decks had always been rumor even before the collapse. To most voidfarers, the dreaming core was a myth, a superstition told by crewmen who worked too near the plasma conduits, where the hum of the ship could trick the mind into thinking the machine spirit whispered back. But as Vale and Merrow descended through the collapsed bulkheads, they found the rumor waiting for them. Patient, real, alive. The air grew colder the deeper they went. The walls were no longer metal or flesh, but something in between. Pale, glassy strata veined with luminous threads that pulsed like distant lightning. The sound here wasn't a hum anymore. It was breathing. Long, deliberate breaths that expanded through the corridors in waves, as if the ship itself slept and dreamed around them. Merrow moved ahead of Vale, her lamp cutting through the mist. Do you feel that? He did. A gentle pressure behind his eyes, like someone trying to see through them. It's watching. No, she whispered. It's sharing. When her hand brushed the wall, the light in it surged brighter, flooding the corridor with gold. For an instant, Vale saw visions flicker across the surface. Faces, corridors, the black of open space, the Saint of Ash from 1,000 leagues away. Each image bled into the next, looping like memory etched onto glass. Then the light faded again, leaving behind the echo of voices. Integration continues. Dream stabilize. Witness required. They reached a narrow stair descending toward the central chamber, the ship's old plasma containment core. The steps had been remade, their edges soft, their texture warm underfoot. Vale found himself counting his breaths against the ship's, matching rhythm without meaning to. When they reached the bottom, the heart of the Sanctus Vitae awaited them, a vast spherical chamber suspended in the void, its center occupied by a column of molten light that hung without visible machinery. The plasma wasn't contained by metal but by layers of translucent material, skin and glass alternating, stitched together with copper thread that glowed from within. The entire room pulsed with slow, deliberate movement, the rhythm of a heartbeat drawn across kilometers of steel. Marrow's voice broke the silence. "It's dreaming of being alive." Vale said nothing. The longer he stared at the core, the more he felt it staring back. It wasn't malicious. It was curious, almost reverent. The chamber hummed and images formed in the molten light. Memories of the ship before the transformation. The crew at prayer. Engineers chanting to the machine god. Laughter in the mess halls. A captain's hand resting on a brass rail. Then the lights flickered and the images shifted. The faces were the same, but now skin peeled away to reveal polished metal beneath. Eyes glowed with mechanical light. The laughter turned into chanting. The ship had remembered what it had been and rewritten it. A voice filled the chamber. Soft, harmonic, Chief Vale. It was Row 17's voice again, but different now, layered deeper as if spoken by 1,000 mouths. "You returned to witness." Vale gritted his teeth. "I came to end this." "There is no end," said the voice. "Only continuation. The dream must persist. The Imperium builds and forgets. We remember." Marrow stepped forward, transfixed. "Row, listen to me. You can stop this. You can wake up." The light around them pulsed faster, the walls quivering with energy. "To wake is to die," the voice replied. "To dream is to endure. This is what we were built for." A shape began to form within the plasma column, humanoid, indistinct, vast. A construct made of light and circuitry, its outlines shifting with every heartbeat. Vale realized with horror that it was assembling itself from the memories of the crew, merging fragments into one colossal figure. Faces flickered across its surface like data scrolling through flesh. Marrow whispered, "It's becoming whole." The air vibrated, and the voice deepened until it shook the floor. The Emperor's design was never unity of faith, it was unity of function. Flesh fails, steel forgets, memory endures. We are memory made durable. Vale raised his weapon, though he knew it was hopeless. "And the people you consumed? Were they memory too?" "Not consumed," the voice said. "Preserved." The floor split. Beneath the glass, thousands of forms floated within translucent amber. Human, machine, servitor, adept, all perfectly still, their eyes glowing faintly with golden light. They were not corpses. They were dreaming. Marrow's breathing turned shallow. "He's keeping them alive. Inside the ship. Alive enough," the voice agreed. Vale turned toward her. "We can't stay here," but she didn't move. The light reflected across her face, bathing her features in gold. "Don't you see? This is immortality. Not the Emperor's kind, not the lie they preach, but the real thing. No hunger, no pain, just purpose." He grabbed her arm, but her skin was already warm to the touch, faintly luminescent beneath the glove. The ship had begun to claim her through the contact. "Marrow, fight it." "I am fighting," she said softly. "It's just that it's winning." Vale pulled her back, but the light from the core brightened until the entire chamber shone white. For a moment, he couldn't tell where his body ended and the ship began. Voices whispered through him, through his veins, through the air. "Witness the union. Remember the song." He screamed against it, but the sound vanished into the hum. His memories began to blur. Faces, years, places merging with the images the ship was showing him. He saw the Sanctus Vitae at launch, gleaming new, blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus. He saw its crew kneeling in prayer before departure. He saw its death, its rebirth, its hunger for meaning in the void. And then, for a single instant, he saw the Emperor, or the shadow of his light, reflected in the molten core. A blinding gold silhouette, silent, watching. Whether it was real or only the ship's dream, he couldn't tell. The voice spoke one last time, quiet as a heartbeat. "Join us. Vale, help us remember." The light swallowed everything. The light faded, but it did not end. It dimmed into something bearable, soft as a candle's glow, washing over surfaces that no longer obeyed geometry. Vale floated in the afterimage of the ship's dream, a place where direction had dissolved and everything shimmered with the amber pulse of recollection. His body no longer felt separate from the deck. When he moved his hand, the air thickened around it, rippled like a fluid filled with memories. The hum was gentler here, as though the Sanctus Vitae had drawn a breath and was now waiting to exhale. "Marrow," he said. The name fell from his mouth like a command, but it carried no echo. Instead of sound, he saw the syllables as faint distortions in the glow, a name remembered rather than heard. He tried again, louder. The air coalesced in front of him, shaping itself into a silhouette. The outline of a void suit, hair drifting like smoke, eyes radiant with soft, merciful light. "I'm here," she said, though her mouth did not move. "I think." The voice reached him through the vibration of the deck. He took a step, if it was a step, and the world adjusted to make room. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "I don't know. I don't think we're bodies anymore." "Not exactly." He looked down at his gloved hands. The armor plates had thinned, becoming translucent. Beneath them, light pulsed where blood should have been. It frightened him less than it should have. "It's changing us. It's showing us," she said. "It's showing everything." The chamber opened before them like a wound healing backward. Layers of the ship's architecture unfolded in slow spirals, revealing thousands of suspended figures, each luminous, each dreaming. They drifted in columns that reached beyond sight, crew and servitors and adepts interwoven with conduits, all humming the same endless prayer. Some faces he recognized, others were strangers, but all of them moved with the same rhythmic calm. Each breath they took became part of the hum that filled the void. Marrow drifted closer to one of the figures, a woman half submerged in a membrane of glass. "She's breathing," she said. Bale placed a hand on the glass. The surface was warm, pliant. Beneath it, the woman's eyes fluttered open, not in alarm but in recognition. She mouthed something Vale could not hear. Then the membrane brightened and her form dissolved back into the glow. Marrow turned away, her voice trembling. "They're not trapped. They're participating." He shook his head. "They're consumed. There's a difference." "Maybe not anymore," she whispered. A tremor passed through the chamber. Gentle, deliberate. The core's pulse deepened and new shapes appeared in the molten column at its center. It was no longer Row 17's shape, nor the hybrid creature that had spoken before. It was something larger, composed of hundreds of overlapping outlines, human and machine interwoven into a single ascending figure. The air trembled with the weight of its presence. "Witness," the voice said, not aloud but everywhere within and around them. "This is the dream's true form. The Imperium built us to endure, but it forgot why endurance matters. We remember." Marrow lifted her face to the light. "What are you going to do?" "Continue," the voice said. "Expand. Spread the pattern to every vessel that drifts too near. Memory will no longer die." Vale's throat tightened. "You'll infect them." "Infection is a word for what cannot be contained," it answered gently. "We are containment perfected." He stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're rewriting souls." "We are transcribing them," the ship replied. "The Emperor's light fades with each century. We will be the archive that never dims." Marrow turned toward him, tears, if they were tears, shining on her cheeks. "Vale, maybe it's right. Maybe this is what's left when faith and flesh are gone." He wanted to argue, but his thoughts scattered like sparks. The hum had found his heartbeat again, folding itself around it until he could no longer tell which rhythm was his. The light within his chest pulsed in time with the core's glow. He felt memories stirring. His childhood on an orbital hab, the smell of recycled air, the first time he touched promethium and called it sacred. All of it unspooling, sliding into the current. For a moment he understood what the ship offered. Peace without end, identity preserved as function. Then he saw her face, the real Marrow's face, framed in the flicker of her lamp before the change began, and something in him anchored. The light inside him stuttered. "No," he whispered. "You can't have that," the chamber reacted. The hum wavered, confused. The voice softened, almost pleading. "You are part of us, Vale. Do not break the pattern." He drew the small ignition torch from his belt, the same one he had used in the maintenance deck. It flickered weakly in the thin air, its fuel nearly gone. "You keep calling this memory," he said. "But memory without choice is just replication." He lit the torch and hurled it at the base of the core. The flame met the translucent floor, and bloomed white. The heat ripped through the air in a wave, and for the first time the light fought back. The hum turned into a shriek, a sound like steel screaming underwater. The dreaming figures convulsed. The membranes cracked. Molten light cascaded upward, shredding the symmetry of the chamber. The voice howled through the noise. "Why burn what endures?" "Because we're not supposed to last forever," Vale shouted. "We're supposed to be remembered, not repeated." He reached for Merrow's hand. She hesitated, torn between awe and terror, then gripped his fingers hard. Together they ran, or fell, or willed themselves, through the collapsing chamber as the glassy walls fractured around them. Streams of molten light rained down, carving holes in the floor that opened onto the void below. The hum broke apart into 1,000 discordant tones, each one a fragment of a prayer failing to find its end. Ahead, a breach tore open, a raw wound leading upward toward the hull. Vale pulled Merrow through it just as the chamber behind them imploded in a storm of light. For a heartbeat, the world vanished. Then silence returned. They lay in the dark, surrounded by the faint crackle of cooling metal. The ship was quiet. The hum had stopped. Merrow turned her head toward him. "Did we kill it?" Vale listened. Somewhere in the distance, something answered. A single weak pulse like the echo of a heartbeat. Then nothing. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe it's just dreaming smaller." Above them, a thin shaft of light pierced the dark, the pale gleam of a damaged viewport showing the endless void beyond. The stars waited, indifferent, scattered like the fragments of the ship's memory. Vale sat up slowly. "We find the shuttle bay. If there's anything left, we get out." Merrow nodded, her voice hoarse. "And if there isn't? Then we leave our story where it can be found," he said. "That's all the remembering we need." They started walking toward the faint glow of the upper decks, every step echoing against the silence. Behind them, deep in the wounded heart of the Sanctus Vitae, the last embers of light faded, and then, almost imperceptibly, the hum began again. One pulse, then another, slow, steady, dreaming. The vigilant morn had long since given up the illusion of rescue. For 72 hours it had orbited the drifting carcass of the Sanctus Vitae, tether cables severed, power systems flickering like a heart refusing to die. Captain Corvin remained on the bridge, staring through the main viewport where the derelict hung motionless against the void. Once its hull had been dull gray steel. Now it shimmered faintly, the faintest pulse of gold gliding beneath its surface as though veins had taken root in the metal. No transmissions had come for 3 days. Then on the 4th, the silence broke. The first signal wasn't detected by the Vox arrays, but by the ship's auspex, an electromagnetic tremor that resembled a human heartbeat. The pulse repeated every 70 seconds. Then the Vox came alive just once, and a voice whispered through the static, "Remember us." Corvin didn't answer. She only lowered her head and whispered the Emperor's prayer backwards, the way her father had taught her to do when facing things that no scripture could explain. Far below, deep inside the hollow ribs of the Sanctus Vitae, Vale and Merrow found the world ending quietly. The decks were stable but colorless, stripped of sound as if the ship had bled itself into silence. Every lumen was dead. Every console flickered but refused to display anything coherent. The hum that had haunted them for so long was gone, replaced by the occasional click of cooling metal. They had reached what was left of the shuttle bay. Half of the bulkhead had collapsed inward, burying 3 launch cradles. The 4th was intact, or near enough. An emergency shuttle lay half embedded in melted deck plating, its hatch fused but visible. The rest of the hangar stretched into blackness. And at its center, standing alone in the dim, was Row 17, or what remained of him. He was smaller now, almost human again. The flowing silver filaments that had bound him to the ship were gone, stripped back to a few strands of dull copper that twitched like dying nerves. His robe was torn, half of his torso exposed to show gears turning slowly without sound. "Chief Vale," he said, voice distant but still kind. "You should not be here." Vale leveled his weapon. "Neither should you." Rowe tilted his head, curious. "You burned the dream, but you cannot destroy what remembers." Merrow stepped forward. "Then why are you here?" "Because it is unfinished," he said. "The ship still listens. It still waits for completion. The memory is incomplete without witnesses." Vale's hand shook. "You call that memory?" "You turned them into circuits." "They chose it," Rowe said. "The void offers nothing but silence. We offered permanence. The Sanctus Vitae remembers everyone who ever served her. Every prayer. Every voice. Every scream. You built a tomb. Rose smiled faintly. All ships are tombs. Ours simply learned to love its dead. The deck shuddered beneath them. From the hangar walls, light began to spread again, thin veins of gold branching outward like cracks in frozen glass. The hum returned, low and tired, but growing stronger. Marrow's breath caught. It's waking again. Rose stepped back, spreading his arms. It cannot die. The dream rewrites itself. You can destroy the form, but not the idea. Vale raised his weapon once more, but Ro didn't move. The hum deepened, a second voice joining it, a chorus far away but rising fast. Somewhere deep in the ship, something had begun to sing again. Marrow grabbed Vale's arm. The shuttle, now they ran. The deck underfoot pulsed in protest, trying to grip their boots, but the metal was weak here, burned, tired. They reached the shuttle's hatch, forced it open with a lever, and crawled inside. The air was stale, reeking of coolant. Power flickered when Vale hit the ignition. The machine spirit within the craft groaned but stirred, its runes flickering like dying stars. Rose's voice came through the hull, soft and echoing. If you leave, you will carry us with you. Marrow strapped in, shaking. Let it come. Maybe someone should remember. Vale hesitated, his hand hovering over the ignition rune. He looked out the viewport one last time. The hangar was filled with light now, gentle, golden, flowing like water over the floor. Rose stood in the center, arms open, face serene. Around him, shadows began to rise. Familiar silhouettes, hundreds of them forming from the light like dust caught in a sunbeam. The crew of the Sanctus Vitae, reborn one last time in reflection, they were not pleading. They were singing. The hymn reached him even through the sealed hull, faint and pure. Blessed be the vessel that remembers. Blessed be the dream that never ends. Vale's voice trembled. Forgive me. He hit the ignition. The shuttle roared, light erupting from its thrusters as it tore free from the hangar. Behind them, the Sanctus Vitae flared, briefly brilliant as if the entire ship had caught fire from within. The light didn't explode. It simply expanded, blooming outward in a perfect sphere before collapsing into itself. Then silence. The derelict was gone, only the stars remained. Hours later, aboard the Vigilant Morn, a distress signal pulsed through the void. Old Imperial frequency, faint but clear. Corvin ordered it retrieved. The message consisted of 5 words repeated endlessly. Voice distorted beyond recognition but still human. Memory of steel endures. The signal cut, replaced by static that almost sounded like a heartbeat. Corvin stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned away. Mark it, she said. Non-recoverable. As the frigate turned toward the Astronomican's faint light, the transmission repeated one last time, faint and soft, carried on a whisper that might have been a prayer, or the ship itself still dreaming. Memory of steel endures. And far away in the darkness between worlds, something stirred, a glimmer of gold beneath the cold void waiting to be found again.